free to continue. We're in Ruth chapter 3 this morning, so I invite you to turn there while you're doing so. Two things. First of all, we're continuing discovering Prescott during the 11 o'clock hour. We meet back in my office. This is the third week, and so if you haven't been attending, it's halfway over, and so you might want to wait till the next go around. And basically, we do this whenever someone says they were interested. And so if you miss this time and you'd like to get involved next time, just fill out one of those things in the communication card in the bulletin, or send me an email, make a phone call, see me out in the foyer and say, hey, and we'll get that scheduled in the near future. So Discovering Prescott, 11 o'clock hour. And then, and I told you this last week, we are partnering with a Hispanic church. They start today. Their service is scheduled to start around noon, so they're going to start getting here about 11:30. And you're welcome to have some overlap and that kind of thing and get to know them. I'm looking forward to meeting their congregation. I've met their pastor and his family a couple times, and so I'm kind of looking forward to that. But at 12 o'clock, we want to make sure we're out of here so that they can do their thing without us being a pest. Does that make sense? Okay, we're in Ruth chapter 3, and we've been working our way through the book of Ruth for a couple weeks now, and so far what we've seen is in chapter 1, things deteriorated to the place where it's hard to imagine things could be worse. If you remember the story, there was a famine in Israel, so Elimelech and Naomi, along with their two sons, decided to relocate to Moab. And during their time in Moab, which was a span of 10 years, Elimelech and Naomi's two sons all passed away. And as we closed out chapter 1, Naomi and Ruth, one of her daughter-in-laws, had returned to Bethlehem, where they were from in Israel, but they were basically destitute, and we could describe Naomi as a broken, bitter woman. But then as we worked through chapter 2, we saw things begin to turn around and things began to look up, and the story played out so that one of the provisions in the ancient world for the poor was you could go out in the fields. The people that owned the fields were charged with leaving a certain amount of their field open and available for the poor to go out and care for themselves. They weren't to harvest the entire field. Leave the edges, leave the corners. If you spill something during harvest, just let it lay, and the people who are poor and needy, they can come out, or strangers in the land, they can come out, and that is how they can care for themselves. And so when the harvest was ready, Ruth had gone out to take advantage of that provision, and she had stumbled upon the fields of Boaz, who was a close relative. And because of his graciousness, Naomi and Ruth's immediate needs were being met. But despite that turnaround, despite that good fortune, they still had some very, very serious problems that were long-term. I mean, their immediate needs are being met, but long-term, it's a scary future. And as we work through chapter 3, we're going to see how Naomi and Ruth addressed those needs and those problems to come up with a long-term solution. I'm calling it, they relied on some ancient answers. And as we look at those ancient answers, I think we're going to learn some important lessons. Now, before we get started, I need to mention a couple things. Number one, we are dealing with an ancient culture that is very different than our own. This culture practiced arranged marriages. This culture had things like a kinsman redeemer in place. Well, we don't do that anymore. And what that means is when you look at the answers, they're not going to be directly transferable. But having said that, what is true is if you look at, well, what was that answer aimed at? What problem was it trying to solve? What was the long-term goal of this approach? The principle underneath the answer. Those things are as valuable today, maybe even more valuable today, because as a culture, we are drifting further and further and further away from biblical norms. And the further you get away from biblical norms, the more problems you're going to have. And so the plan today is to work through chapter 3. And there we're going to see how God was at work, and that every mountain, remember, Ruth is a book of overcoming faith. And when it comes to faith, it's not so much how big is my faith. Because the Bible says if I have the faith as small as a little green mustard seed, I can say to that mountain, be removed and cast into the sea, and it shall be done unto you. The size of my faith is not the issue. The size of my God is. And when I put my faith in him, he's the one that moves the mountains, not me. And as we work through chapter 3, we're going to see God at work moving every mountain that Ruth and Naomi faced. So we're going to look at the story, but then we're going to close and look at those underlying principles. Because as I said, I think they're still very, very important today. And so let's get started. We're going to begin in chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. And I want to start here because underlying the events that we're going to see play out and the answers that are going to be applied is a very simple goal. If you ask me, well, why is this happening? Why is the story of Ruth important? One of the goals God had for his people, the people of Israel, was that they would experience a stable society, because stable societies tend to be prosperous societies. And to achieve that goal, there were a lot of different provisions that were placed into the law, a lot of norms that were adopted so that stability could be the norm in Israel. And so let's read verses 1 and 2. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." You need a long-term solution for the rest of your life. And we've been making it from day to day to day. We had the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, but then what are we going to do for the rest of the year? So I've got to find a long-term answer. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. And tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. And when we start looking at the goal, and Naomi's about to hatch a plan, basically. We need a long-term answer here. Because God wanted Israel to have stability. Now, some of the norms that existed at that time in order to achieve the goal of a stable society was arranged marriage. That's why Ruth's saying, hey, I need to figure out, Naomi was trying to figure out what is in Ruth's best interest. And back in that day and age, they practiced arranged marriages. It was not unique to Israel. In fact, basically, until relatively recently, as far as history is concerned, if you go all the way back to Adam and Eve, and then you come forward to today, and you think of that as a timeline, it's relatively recently where We in the Western culture gave up the idea of arranged marriages. And when you look around the world, guess what? Arranged marriages is still the norm in an awful lot of places. And when the practice was arranged marriages, what you basically have is moms, dads, or guardian of children make arrangements for their sons and daughters to marry. Now, it's a very foreign concept in our culture. And oftentimes, when it comes to foreign concepts to a culture, we tend to turn those things into right-wrong issues. This isn't a right-wrong issue. There's pros and cons to arranging marriages. In fact, I would dare say, except in a case of my marriage, it would be a good idea. I'm just not interested in it. There's pros and cons in it, though. Just like there's pros and cons in our dynamic of dating and engagement and marriage, there's good and bad. The point in addressing this is not to decide whether this is right or wrong. The point is, this is an effort to make sure Israel has a stable society. And the bedrock foundation of any society is the family. It has been said, as the family goes, so goes the culture. Now, when I look at the United States, in my mind, that fact explains why the family has been attacked and undermined in our culture. You say, well, I'm not sure it is. Okay. And I'm not going to bore you with too many statistics. But marriage is in decline. The number of young people who are willing to actually enter into marriage is shrinking every single year. The number of people that are willing to live together is going up, but living together and marriage are two very different things. The birth rate, as a result, is in decline. We no longer even have a replacement level. Not to have a morbid thought for the day. One day I am going to expire. One day my wife is going to expire. One day we will all expire. And so not only do we have fewer people willing to get married, when they do get married, they are producing fewer children. Rate is on the rise. Statistically, in our country, more children are born out of wedlock than into married couples' homes, and more children are being raised in single-parent homes than in intact homes. And I can go on and on and on, but statistically, this trend spells disaster for a given culture. In our culture, when these norms are true, things like struggling in school and dropping out of school, drug use, crime, gang involvement, and imprisonment all skyrocket as probable outcomes. Why? Because God designed the family. Moms and dads raising their children as the incubator for the next generation to be prepared for life. That is how he ordained societies to perpetuate themselves. It's not the government and it's not the school system. It's moms and dads. And in Israel, this meant moms and dads looked for the right match for their sons and daughters, just like Naomi was looking to make a match for Ruth for her long-term good. Now, I want to spend some time talking about a problem that existed in the ancient world that kind of was the enemy of stability, and that's human mortality. If we look at statistics globally, and the most recent statistic I could find was 2019. It's probably a little lower now because of the pandemic, but the global life expectancy as of 2019 was 73.4 years of age, and in the United States as of 2022, the life expectancy was age 79. It tends to be a little bit higher for women and a little bit lower for men. In the ancient world, things were very different. Now, we don't get statistics on kind of pre-Greco-Roman era as far as history is concerned. But during the Greco-Roman era, the average age that the scholars estimate for life expectancy was 30 to 35 years of age. Now, that doesn't mean people did not live into their 70s and 80s. There's a couple factors that bring it way down. First of all, infant mortality, which some estimate was as high as 30%. And so if you take an 80-year-old and a 0-year-old and you average to two, obviously you get a big drop. Two other factors: the living conditions compared to the world in which we live. We have clean drinking water. We have good sanitation policies. Our food is refrigerated and preserved. They lived in very, what we would call, unhygienic conditions, making the probability of disease much higher. And if disease or some kind of injury were incurred, guess what? They would break out the leeches and figure, well, you just have some bad blood and let's hook some leeches on you and suck the blood out of you and you'll be well just like that. The medical care was lacking. And so you add it all up, life expectancy, 30 to 35 years of age. Now, how realistic is that? Well, when we looked at Ruth chapter 1, when Naomi and Elimelech and their two sons moved to Moab thinking they're going to live happily ever after, what did we discover? They did not, because in a span of just 10 years, Elimelech and both sons died. Now, people die today. But I don't know that I've ever seen anything like that unless it was in like a car wreck. That sort of thing, right? This is why they had things like a kinsman redeemer in place. Because if you look at that phenomena of Ruth chapter 1, where her husband and both sons die, and you multiply that on scale in a given society, you're going to have massive instability. So in the law, there was a provision. We're going to have this thing called a kinsman redeemer, and we looked at it last week. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow isn't to go marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out of Israel. However, if a man does not want to marry his brother's wife, she'll go to the elders at the town gate and say, my husband's brother refuses to carry on his brother's name in Israel. He will not fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to me. Then the elders of the town shall summon him and talk to him. And if he persists in saying, I do not want to marry her, think of this happening on like cable TV. His brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, take off one of her sandals, spit in his face, and say, this is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's family line. If you ever thought God doesn't have a sense of humor, read this and you'll laugh. That man's line shall be known in Israel as the family of the unsandaled. This provision is meant to do two things. A widow that has lost her husband and has no children is probably going to lose her property in short order. because she won't be able to take care of it. She won't be able to produce with it. And so it'll be like an anchor over her neck. And so this provision would allow someone in the family to come along and take over the property. But it wouldn't be theirs, it would be the widow's. And at the same time, he would marry that widow and produce a child, an heir, not his heir, the dead brother's heir. So that family line would continue. It's directly tied to the problem we saw in Ruth chapter 1. And as we come to chapter 2, that's what Ruth and Naomi are dealing with. And as I said, Naomi is hatching a plan. And it's a somewhat simple plan. We're going to approach Boaz. Let's read the story, starting in verse 3. Naomi says to Ruth, wash, put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes, then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. And when he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. I will do whatever you say, Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. And when Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. And Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. And in the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He asked. I am your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are guardian redeemer of our family. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You've not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. And although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there's another who is more closely related than I. So stay here for the night. And in the morning, if he wants to do the duty as your guardian redeemer, good. Let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here till morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. He also said, bring me the shawl you're wearing and hold it out. And when she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. And then he went back to town. So Naomi's hatching this plot. And the plot is necessary because Ruth and Naomi are destitute. When they relocated to Moab, Elimelech and both sons had died. She'd come back to Bethlehem with Ruth in tow, but they have no means of support. And they were literally surviving because of the generosity of Boaz. And it's probably that generosity and that kindness that he is showing that led Naomi to believe that he would agree to be a kinsman redeemer so that their long-term needs would be met. Because it's not a match that you would normally think of. As far as we can tell in the narrative, by Boaz's response, he's the age of Elimelech, Naomi's husband. He's not a young man as the age of the 2 sons who had also passed away. He's not of that vintage. He's of this vintage. So it's not the kind of match you would normally make. But because of the poverty they were experiencing, they needed a long-term solution. So Naomi tells Ruth, okay, wash up, put some perfume on, put your best clothes on, because tonight we're going to approach Boaz to be your kinsman redeemer. And she explains how to go about it. This is an agricultural society, and Boaz is a farmer, and he has harvested his grain. And after the grain has been harvested, it needs to be threshed, beaten out so that just the kernels. It's not that dissimilar to the almond harvest, where they shake them off the trees and sweep them up, and then they gather them up and they take the hulls so that you only have the nut left. They don't want to pay you for the rocks and the dirt and all that stuff. They want to pay you for the nuts. So they get it down to that. Well, that's what threshing is all about. And it's usually a time of celebration, as was indicated in the text, but it's also a time of caution. We're living in the days of the judges, remember, and it's not uncommon for raiders to just sweep in and steal your harvest, so it's a time of caution. So Boaz is going to go to the threshing floor, and he's going to thresh his grain, but then he's going to sleep there to guard it, because he doesn't want anyone to take it. And so Naomi tells Ruth, you watch where he lays down while he's guarding his crop. And when he falls asleep, you go down and you lie down at his feet. And eventually he's going to wake up, and we will see if he's willing to be your redeemer. Something stirs Boaz in the middle of the night, and he finally notices, hey, there's somebody at my feet. And it's not like modern times where you can flick on a light and see what's going on. It's pitch dark. So he doesn't know who's down there. He just knows someone's down there. So he asks, well, who in the world are you? And Ruth identifies herself. And when she says, spread your garment over me, that's basically a marriage proposal. Now, I'm sure your proposal and engagement was much more romantic. You might have been in a fine restaurant, or you might have been at like a campfire at the beach or up at the mountains or some romantic setting. I once told a young man who had elaborate plans for such a proposal, and they ended up having an argument out in the parking lot about it. And I asked this young man, well, what is the goal of proposing? Well, to have her agree. And so, as you were having this argument, how did the argument end out? Well, she didn't want to do the elaborate plan, and so we just agreed that we would get married, and that was that. And I said, you know what I call that? Success. If the goal was to get engaged and you got engaged, success. And this may not have been the most romantic engagement, but it was successful. In fact, Boaz was overjoyed and excited to marry Ruth. But there was a problem. He's not the closest relative. And before he would be able to marry Ruth, the closer relative would need to be approached. And if the closer relative were willing to be the redeemer, then so be it. The problem is solved. But if he is not, Boaz has indicated, I am more than happy to accept. So he sends her home, and it's interesting. He sends her home with 6 measures of grain and a promise, I'm going to take care of this immediately. We're not going to let this hang. And he also sends her home with reputation intact, because she spends the night, but nothing happens. And before it is light, so that people can be recognized, he sends her on his way so there won't be any kind of gossip. And we end chapter 3 with Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz all playing the waiting game. So we close the chapter starting in verse 16. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go, my daughter? Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her. And he added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. Now, I want to take this story and look at the solutions they came up with. And again, not so much look at them, but look at the underlying principles. Because when we start looking at things like arranged marriage and this whole idea of a kinsman redeemer, it's a bit strange for us. It's not familiar. We don't do that in our culture. But the underlying principles that these answers are addressing are still very, very valid. So I want to close by looking at a couple of them. And the first one that I'd like to bring out is the idea that stability and security in a culture is very, very important. Now the question would be, well, where does God say that is found? And when I look in the scripture, the very first institution that he starts is the family. God roots this idea of stability and security in the family. It is the mechanism he's chosen to use to raise up the next generation. It's how healthy societies perpetuate itself. He did establish a role for the government. He established a role for the church. But none of them supplant the family. And because that is true, I think it's very important that we always promote and protect family values. And in our culture, probably more so, because the reality is those values are very much under attack. Do you realize if you would have gone up to any man on the street or woman on the street 40, 50 years ago and said, what's a family? What's marriage? What's a man? What's a woman? You think there would be any kind of confusion? You'd get pretty simple answers, right? I hope you do realize today the definition of marriage, the definition of family. Good grief, we have a woman sitting on our Supreme Court. When asked, can you define a woman? She said, no, I cannot. I'm not a biologist. And she is one of 9 justices that decide the law. All of these things in our society are up for grabs. The sanctity of marriage. I read an article this week. I forget the name or the title or the headline, but the idea of monogamy is going to become a foreign concept. It was written about some politician down in Georgia who's a gay Muslim who is not just in one long-term relationship, but 2 long-term relationships, and all 3 of them are going to start a family together, and in her mind, that's just as much a family as the traditional family. Well, why stop at 2? Why not have 5 or 6? Good grief. If you're willing to just redefine everything, 10 minutes ago, this is what a family is, not anymore. That's the world we live in. Human sexuality, the sanctity of marriage, the right to life, gender identity, the role of parents, all of these things are being redefined in our culture. And so when I talk about promoting and protecting family values, I would encourage you to understand what the Bible says about the matter and not just believe it in contrast to the changing definitions that our culture is bringing, to the forefront. Believe what God has to say about these things, but practice them and share them. But whenever we speak in that context, we need to make sure we're speaking the truth in love. Harshness, judgmentalism, that sort of thing will often be discarded before it is heard. So we speak the truth in love. Why? Because as the family goes, so goes the culture. And God roots security and stability in the family. Another one. Self-sufficiency is still important. Why are Ruth and Naomi in the bind that they're in? They're destitute. They have no means of supporting themselves. They're totally dependent on others. Now that's okay when you start your life journey. When we are born into a family, we are totally dependent on moms and dad to provide and protect and guide. But as we grow up, a shift should be taking place so that more and more we are able to stand on our own 2 feet so that we are not dependent. We are moving towards independence so that we can be productive members of society. That is how healthy societies continue from generation to generation. And that means parents and we ourselves as individuals should always keep an eye on the future and be preparing for the future. And in this context in which we're talking at the moment, in my mind, that means you need to get some kind of education that allows you to market yourself. Now, that could be a skill in more of a blue-collar field. You know what? The world needs plumbers. They need electricians. They need HVAC. They need car mechanics. They need people that are more of the dirty jobs kind of guy. What's that guy's name? Mike Rowe. Who? Mike Rowe. The guy, he's like the guru of the dirty jobs. The world needs those kinds of people. And we are all unique. We are all different. So some people are more geared towards more of an academic kind of profession. Might be teaching, might be nursing, might be accounting, might be legal, might be medical. The point is, we all need to know, okay, this is how I'm wired. Parents need to understand this. We need to understand this. And whether I'm more wired towards a blue collar or I'm more wired towards a white collar, the point is, as you are growing up so that you can be self-sufficient and a productive member of a community, you need to have something where you can go out into the world and market yourself. Because basically what you're doing is you're asking someone, pay me to do this. Well, what can you do that makes it in my best interest to pay you to do it? You see what I'm saying? We need to be able to market ourselves. Let's look at a third one. This is my phraseology. Dating is for mating. And basically what I'm saying is we better improve how we're dating, because you know what? An awful lot of people make really bad choices and they end up being a part of the divorce statistics. So I think lesson 3 is dating is for mating. We no longer practice arranged marriages, but they did have a positive side because arranged marriages tend to focus on practicality. Economics and community were considered over romance and love, and we said phooey on that. And we've shucked the arranged marriages for dating where we are looking to fall in love. And that can be problematic because we've all heard the saying, love is blind. And you don't want to have your love lead to blindness so that you marry foolishly. One of the most common things that I hear in counseling when a marriage is having trouble is, well, they changed. And generally speaking, I point out to them, no, they didn't. No, they didn't. You had love is blind sickness. I have a friend back in Michigan. He wrote his thesis on this. All those things that we thought were cute aren't cute when you're married. They really aren't. Oh, he's so close to his mom and dad. And over here you find out he's a mama's boy. That's not cute anymore. He was rebellious and he stood up on his own 2 feet. And over here, you know what that means? He can't hold a job for 2 minutes. People don't change. We just, our whole dating, we don't aim at getting to know the person. We're not looking to know the person. We're looking to fall in love, and we're all worried about romance and feelings. And we end up marrying foolishly. I always suggest never date someone that is not good marriage material. In my mind, it's simple math. If you date 10 people in your life and 5 of them are losers, you have a 50% chance of marrying a loser. If you only marry 5, or if you only date 5 and they're all good prospects, you've got a 100% chance of marrying someone that's worth marrying. Don't date losers. Secondly, you don't know if they're a loser or not until you get to know them. Aim at getting to know them, not aim at falling in love. That leads me to my last point. Marry a godly partner. That's what Naomi was looking for Ruth. Now, that doesn't mean they will be perfect, because no one's perfect. But there's a reason why God says we are not to be unequally yoked, and you can define that unequally yoked in a couple different ways. Obviously, it would mean don't marry a non-believer. But if your intent is to walk with God and serve him, don't marry a fallen, wayward believer either. Because walking with God and being happily married is already challenging enough. Do you realize how many differences have to be overcome to stay happily married? You and your mate come from different families. You come from different education systems often. You have different personalities. You value different things. You have different traditions. You have different goals. You have different aspirations. You have things that you like and don't like that differ from each other. You understand roles differently. Your view of finances is different. Spirituality, there are differences. There are just a boatload of differences, and those two people coming together, the first thing God says to them is you got to leave all those baggage, all that baggage behind so that you can cleave to one another. It's like glue. You have to start with a smooth, clean surface for the glue to be able to bond the two objects together. And something like an unequal yoke is like putting sand between two things of wood and trying to glue them together. It just doesn't work very well. Now, like I said, marrying a believer doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. But when a couple has a heart in tune with God, they have a great advantage. As I mentioned earlier, you have accepted God's invitation to be a part of something bigger than yourself. And when each member of a marriage team says, you know what, this is what's best for the cause of Christ, so not my will, but thy will be done, you have a great advantage at overcoming obstacles and problems in your marriage. And when we look at these 4 lessons, and I'll go back and just walk through them again, the idea of security and stability being rooted in the family, and the idea of having a marketable trade with which to market yourself in the career realm so that you are not in the position of Ruth and Naomi, and understanding the purpose of dating so that you have a successful marriage and the idea of marrying a godly partner. I hope you see what I mean. All of these things are very, very important, and even more so in our world as our culture continues to drift further and further and further away from biblical norms. So whether you're one of the young people here and all of this is in front of you, or whether you're a parent going through it with your children right now, or a grandparent dealing with, that new generation of grandchildren that's coming up, all of these things are important. And it's my hope that you would not just know that it's important, but you would practice, that you would live out their importance and share it with your family, with the people around you. It'll be good for you, good for your family, good for our culture, good for our church. Let's pray. Father, thank you. These are important lessons. I can put myself in Ruth and Naomi's shoes. In fact, in many ways, it describes my childhood, living off of the graciousness of others. So, thank you for the reminder. May we take these lessons to heart and to the best of our ability live them. So instead of living with regret in the future, we live with the joy of having these lessons lead us to making good choices so that we prosper. Because you're the one who died that we could have life to its very full. You want us to have that kind of life. And I believe as we follow these principles, we will. Thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.